In 1963, Frank Sinatra's 19-year-old son Frank Jr. was kidnapped from his hotel room in Lake Tahoe and held for ransom. He was released 2 days later when his father agreed to pay the $240,000, and the three perpetrators were captured and arrested soon afterwards. But the kidnapping had a lasting traumatic impact on Frank Sr., who began carrying dimes in his pockets everywhere he went, since the kidnappers demanded all communication be done through payphones, and Frank was concerned that one day he wouldn't have enough change to call them. It became such a habit that the legendary singer was even buried with 10 dimes in his pocket after he died. In January of 1993, Texas attorney David Glenn Lewis planned on watching the Super Bowl alone at home while his wife and daughter were out shopping, but when they returned, there was no sign of him. They found freshly made sandwiches in the fridge, David's laundry in the washing machine, and David's watch and wedding ring on the counter, but no David in sight. The next night, a man was killed in a hit-and-run 1,600 miles away near Yakima, Washington, and 11 years later, the body would be identified as David Glenn Lewis. How David ended up 1,600 miles away so quickly and the circumstances surrounding his death remain total mysteries to this day. A 27-year-old beauty queen from Kosovo has reportedly died after attempting to flee from police. Güler Erdogan allegedly tried driving home while drunk until she ran into a police checkpoint. After a breathalyzer recorded her BAC as 3 times the legal limit, she decided to flee from the scene on foot, fearing that her modeling career was over. She ran over to the edge of the overpass and reportedly fell over by accident, plummeting 50 feet onto the 6-lane motorway below before she was fatally struck by a car. In 2012, a woman from South Carolina discovered that her ex-boyfriend of 12 years had been secretly living in her attic for several weeks. She'd been hearing strange noises and nails dropping from the ceiling of her bedroom, before eventually sending her nephew to investigate, who found the man sleeping on the attic's heating unit. The ex-boyfriend had also rigged the ceiling vents to apparently look into the woman's bedroom from above. Upon discovery, he fled the scene before police arrived but was later apprehended. In 2009, 25-year-old Antoinette Davis told police her 5-year-old daughter Shania had been kidnapped. Security footage showed Shania being carried to a nearby hotel room by a man who was identified as Mario McNeil, the ex-boyfriend of Antoinette's sister. When authorities conducted a follow-up interview with Antoinette, her story changed to something much darker. She admitted she had sold Shania to the man who was her drug dealer, merely to settle a $200 debt. To the shock of the officers, Antoinette disturbingly told them he was only supposed to have S with her. McNeil had lent Davis the money to help her pay for a hotel room, and eventually told her he either wanted his money or sex, so Antoinette offered her 5-year-old daughter. McNeil was eventually apprehended after Shania's body was found on the side of the road several days after he smothered her to death. McNeil was sentenced to death, while Antoinette received 17 years in prison and is set to be released in 2026. While filming the 1972 film Napoleon and Samantha, 9-year-old Jodie Foster was mauled by a substitute lion on set. The big cat picked Foster up, shook her around like a rag doll, and only released her when its trainer yelled, "Drop it." Foster later said she was in shock and thought it was an earthquake as she watched the rest of the crew run away. The same lion had nearly mauled Bob Denver while filming an episode of Gilligan's Island years earlier, and shouldn't have been anywhere near a film studio afterwards. Foster still has scars on her stomach and back from the incident and has suffered from severe ailurophobia ever since. Almost immediately after being liberated from concentration camps, an estimated 14,500 Holocaust survivors died from refeeding syndrome, since their bodies couldn't process normal food after such prolonged starvation. During the back surgery of a Hawaiian man in 2006, the surgeon couldn't find the 2 titanium rods that were supposed to be implanted into the man's spine, so he decided to improvise by implanting the shaft of a screwdriver instead. The screwdriver eventually snapped, and the man died 2 years later following 3 more corrective back surgeries. The patient's family was eventually awarded $5.6 million in a malpractice lawsuit. When Brian Spencer was called up to play in his first NHL game in 1970, he told his father Roy to watch the game that night since he knew he'd be interviewed between periods. But when he couldn't find a broadcast of the game, Roy drove to the nearest TV station in a fury and held the staff at gunpoint, ordering them to broadcast the Maple Leafs game immediately. The station complied, but as Roy was leaving the building, he was confronted by Canadian police and eventually killed after a standoff. The hockey player's life would end up spiraling out of control, as he would also be killed in a shootout after trying to rob his crack dealer. Wow, nice family, huh? During a hunting trip in 1913, race car driver Kamil Janatsky hid behind a bush and made animal noises to prank his friend before he was promptly shot. He was rushed to the hospital but died on his way there, fulfilling his own prediction that he would die in a Mercedes. In 1970, U.S. Air Force pilot Captain William Schaffner was ordered to follow a UFO over the North Sea when he ended up vanishing without a trace. A few weeks later, Schaffner's aircraft was found by divers and recovered from the sea. Strangely, its cockpit was sealed and the ejector seat was intact, but Schaffner's body was nowhere to be found. In 2022, James Grimes won an air guitar competition while on a cruise to Mexico, which was the last thing he remembered before waking up overboard in the Gulf of America without a single ship in sight. Grimes had to tread water for over 18 hours and endure countless stings from 2 swarms of jellyfish before he was finally rescued by the Coast Guard. 17-year-old Lisa Noland planned to take her own life just before she was abducted by serial killer Bobby Joe Long. He raped her several times and held her hostage for 26 hours until she managed to convince him to let her go. Lisa got the man captured, while the traumatic experience gave her a new lease on life and inspired her to become a police officer. After brutally murdering his ex-girlfriend's parents with a baseball bat in 2001, just last week, South Carolina man Brad Sigmund was executed via firing squad, the first such execution in the United States since 2010. Sigmund was given a choice and opted for firing squad over the other state-approved methods of lethal injection and the electric chair, since he said it was much quicker than the other methods, which have inflicted prolonged and potentially torturous deaths on his friends. Sigmund was strapped to a metal chair with a hood over his head and a target placed over his heart, while 3 volunteer officers fired at him from 15 feet away. In 1915, a strange illness called encephalitis lethargica broke out across the globe. Nicknamed the sleeping sickness, the disease attacked the patient's brains, leaving them frozen in a statue-like state, fully conscious but unable to move or speak. One of the most haunting aspects of this disease was its unpredictability. Some patients recovered quickly, never experiencing any long-term effects, while others went into a deep coma and never woke up. Then there were patients who seemed completely recovered, until years later when the illness came back and suddenly turned them catatonic. At least 500,000 people died from the terrifying disease before it vanished without explanation 10 years later, just as suddenly as it appeared. While many theories have been put forth over the last century, epidemiologists still remain haunted by the mysterious sickness and its unknown origins. Some say it never left, but still lingers in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Despite having no prior acting experience, 12-year-old Kevin Clark was cast as drummer Freddie Jones in the cult classic School of Rock. Sadly, he died in 2021 at the age of 32 after being fatally struck by a car while riding his bike in Chicago. In 1978, 134 Chinese sailors were killed because a Navy lieutenant broke up with his girlfriend. After being dumped, she took her own life, leading to the man being discharged from duty pending the investigation. So while raging on his last voyage home, he decided to detonate the charges on the ship, causing it to sink while killing 134 sailors on board. Scientists have conducted studies where they transferred gut bacteria from schizophrenic humans to mice, resulting in the mice exhibiting schizophrenic behaviors. This suggests a potential link between gut health and the development of mental disorders. In 1997, 50-year-old Massachusetts woman Judy Smith was in Philadelphia with her husband when she told him she was going out sightseeing in the city, but she never returned. Months later, her body was found in a forest 600 miles away in North Carolina, wearing different clothes and a new backpack. She had been mysteriously stabbed to death, and her killer remains unidentified to this day. While on vacation in Bulgaria in 2014, 28-year-old German man Lars Matank got into a bar fight that left him with a ruptured eardrum. He was unable to fly home with his friends due to the injuries, but told them he was totally fine and only planned on staying for a couple extra nights. However, the next day, Lars began acting paranoid. He called his mom and whispered that she should cancel his credit cards because someone was trying to kill him. Security cams in the hotel showed him pacing up and down the halls and peeking out the windows for several hours. After arriving at the airport the next day, Lars saw the airport doctor, who gave him the okay to fly. But that's when Lars began shaking and suddenly yelled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He then got up and sprinted from the office, leaving behind all of his luggage, including his phone, wallet, and ID. Once outside, he was seen jogging from the airport, hopping a fence, and sprinting in the direction of a nearby forest. Lars would never be seen again. RFK Jr.'s gravelly speaking voice is caused by a rare neurological condition he developed in his early 40s called spasmodic dysphonia, which causes the muscles that open and close the vocal cords to spasm involuntarily. Here's what he used to sound like before this condition versus after.
And if somebody dumps something into the river that's poison, and it goes into a drinking water intake, and children drink that drinking water, that is child abuse.
I think those vaccines we need to have, again, true double-blind placebo-controlled trials on that. There's 25% of Americans.
While the true cause is unknown, people who do a lot of public speaking are far more likely to develop this condition. RFK required a titanium bridge in his vocal folds to be able to speak at all, and receives Botox shots in his vocal cords every 4 months. He says it's painful to hear himself speak and feels sorry for those who have to listen to him. In 2022, a 25-year-old woman named Sharaban wanted to escape personal and family issues in her life. So she devised a crazy plan to fake her own death and searched social media for lookalikes, eventually stumbling upon a German beauty influencer named Khadija who closely resembled her. After promising the model free beauty treatments, Sharaban kidnapped her and stabbed her 56 times before leaving the body in her car, attempting to pass it off as her own. The influencer was initially misidentified as Sharaban until DNA testing revealed the disturbing truth, as her horrific plan resulted in life in prison. Australian woman Noella Rukunko became famous in 2015 after crashing her own funeral. She was presumed dead after her husband paid several hitmen to kill her upon wrongly suspecting that she was cheating on him. But instead, the hitmen spared her life since they knew her brother and refused to kill women or children. They revealed their husband's plot to her before providing all the evidence and helping her fake her own death. Days later, Noella walked into her own funeral that was organized by her husband, causing him to faint on the spot. He was later arrested, confessed to the crime, and sentenced to 9 years in prison for incitement to murder. 20-year-old Ukrainian OF model Maria Kovalchuk had been missing for 10 days until she was recently found severely injured and dumped on the side of the road in Dubai. She disappeared after telling her friends she was invited to a Dubai hotel party by 2 men who said they were representatives of the modeling business, and her loved ones became worried when she didn't return home on her scheduled flight 2 days later. Maria was initially thought to be dead when she was found laying on the side of the road with severe injuries including a broken spine and multiple broken limbs. She was rushed to the hospital and immediately required 4 surgeries to save her life. A police investigation revealed that she reportedly sustained the injuries after entering a restricted construction site by herself and falling from a height. However, Maria's family have disputed this account, believing that the construction site story is a cover-up for something darker. According to reports, the model currently can't speak but is expected to eventually recover. After leaving the hit sitcom Different Strokes and struggling to find success as an adult actress, Dana Plato spiraled into addiction, poverty, and run-ins with the law. In 1991, Dana entered a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun and demanded all the money in the cash register, after which the flabbergasted clerk called 911 saying, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Different Strokes." Dana soon lost custody of her only child, was caught forging prescriptions, and attempted to salvage her career by posing for Playboy, but found little redemption. By 1999, she was a faded star clinging desperately to the hope of a comeback, but her appearance on The Howard Stern Show turned into a public humiliation. Stern and his callers openly mocked her claims of being sober for 10 years, with some cruelly suggesting she was just moments away from another downfall. Within 24 hours of the interview, Dana died alone from an overdose of prescription pills at the young age of 34. Atticus Shaffer, who played Brick in Modern Family, has type 4 osteogenesis imperfecta, aka brittle bone disease. The painful disorder prevents his body from building strong bones, causing his bones to break rather easily even from minor trauma. The 4'8" actor has fractured his bones countless times and received dozens of plates, rods, and screws in his legs. Despite this, Shaffer has noted that his struggles with the genetic disorder have helped him become more empathetic and compassionate as he's had to constantly overcome extreme pain. In 2014, some sick piece of human garbage glued dozens of razor blades to playground equipment at a park in Illinois. Several children cut themselves while climbing the monkey bars or using the slide, but the perpetrator was never caught. In 2012, a married cop from Atlanta named William Martinez died from a heart attack while having a threesome with his friend and a woman who wasn't his wife. Afterwards, Martinez's wife was awarded $3 million in a malpractice lawsuit when the jury found that his doctor didn't properly diagnose his heart condition or warn him to end all physical activity until further testing was completed. In 2010, University of Alabama Huntsman professor Dr. Amy Bishop was at a biology department meeting when she pulled out a handgun. A witness said that she got up suddenly, pulled out a gun, and started shooting each one of us. She started with the one closest to her and went down the row shooting her targets in the head. This wasn't random shooting around the room. This was execution style. Amy killed 3 of her colleagues and injured 3 others before her gun jammed, forcing her to surrender. During the investigation, it was found that Amy had shot and killed her brother in 1986, but was never charged since the death was ruled an accident. She was also questioned after a 1993 pipe bomb incident that was directed at her lab's supervisor. And in another previous incident, she punched a woman in the face for taking the last available booster seat at an IHOP. Along with obvious mental health problems, Bishop was apparently motivated to murder her colleagues after the university denied her tenure. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison. Mary Bell was only 10 years old when she committed 2 shocking murders in 1968, making her one of the youngest known child killers in modern history. Raised in a violently abusive home in Newcastle, England, Mary first killed 4-year-old Martin Brown by strangulation after telling him his neck looked sore and offering to massage it. She then returned to the scene days later to leave taunting notes saying that she would kill again. 2 months later, she murdered 3-year-old Brian Howe in the same way, not only strangling him but also mutilating his body with scissors and carving the letter M into his stomach. Along with her 13-year-old accomplice Norma Bell, Mary was arrested and showed no remorse during her interrogation. In court, she was only convicted of manslaughter due to her young age and served 12 years in prison before being released with a new identity. Mary and her daughter were granted lifelong anonymity by the court as her current whereabouts are unknown. In 2006, 26-year-old Illinois teacher and wrestler Samson Shelton admitted to police that he raped a 17-year-old student before choking her and tossing her body into a wooded area. He then put a belt around her neck to make it look like she was strangled and left her for dead, after which Shelton went line dancing with friends. Suffering from brain damage and a broken neck, the teenager survived but had to relearn how to swallow, walk, and talk. But despite his heinous crimes, Shelton was released on parole just last year after serving out 17 of his 20-year prison sentence. In 2008, a train traveling 70 miles an hour struck and killed an 18-year-old man who was running across the tracks and apparently didn't realize how fast the train was moving. The impact flung the man's body over 100 feet, and his flying body parts knocked a 58-year-old woman to the ground, breaking her wrist, shoulder, and leg. The woman later sued the man's family on the basis that, if you did something as stupid as this guy did, you have to be responsible for what comes from it. Just last year, a 23-year-old man died from a catastrophic spinal injury while playing at a Topgolf with some friends. In what was described as a prank gone wrong, his drunken friends had pushed him off the platform, causing him to miss the safety netting and fall 12 feet directly onto his head. In 1990, a flight heading from Medellin, Colombia to New York City crashed onto a hillside after running out of fuel, killing nearly half of the passengers on board. While being treated for serious injuries, 2 of the male passengers were arrested when ER doctors found baggies of cocaine that they'd swallowed and attempted to smuggle. Both men were sentenced to 6 years to life in prison. The British Pet Massacre was a week-long event in 1939 during which an estimated 400,000 cats and dogs, 1/4 of England's pet population, were killed out of fear of them eventually being gassed or left behind during an evacuation. Almost immediately afterwards, the event was recognized as completely unnecessary, stemming from social panic from the impending war and people seeking a way to feel like they were contributing to the war effort. None of the fears that led to the massacre actually ended up materializing. Initially known for her ridiculously large implants, German model and actress Martina Bigg says she identifies as black. She's had 23 breast augmentation procedures, as well as numerous perma-tanning treatments to darken her skin, eyebrows, and eye color. The woman says she was baptized as a real African woman while living in Kenya and hopes to build bridges between races. During a camping trip in June of 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Lloyd Martin was last seen hiding behind a bush, planning to jump out and scare his father before he completely vanished. Despite the largest search in Great Smoky Mountains National Park history, no trace of him was ever found. While serial killer Edmund Kemper was serving time in prison, he participated in the Blind Project, a volunteer program where he recorded audiobooks for the visually impaired. Kemper spent over 5,000 hours in the recording booth, as his deep voice was apparently well suited for narration. In 1978, Amos Atkinson held an entire restaurant of 30 people hostage while armed with a shotgun, demanding that his criminal friend be released from prison. But the situation took an unexpected turn when the man's mother stormed the building in her pajamas and hit Atkinson over the head with her handbag while telling him to stop being so stupid. Atkinson then surrendered peacefully. When Pope Pius died, his embalming was so poorly botched that his body began to rot and bloat almost immediately. During the public viewing, his nose fell off, and his body reportedly exploded from the gas buildup inside of the casket due to blistering heat. After being killed in a shootout in 1911, outlaw Elmer McCurdy's embalmed body was mummified and passed around as a carnival sideshow prop for more than 60 years. His corpse was finally identified in 1976, when a TV crew realized that the mannequin was actually a human body. In 2007, a 53-year-old woman died from a stroke, and her organs, both kidneys, lungs, and her liver, were donated to 4 different patients. Over the following months and years, all 4 recipients developed breast cancer, from which 3 of them ended up dying despite treatment. It was later found that the donor had breast cancer that hadn't been discovered at the time of her death. The only survivor had their donated kidney removed early before the cancer could spread. Doctors have said this was an extremely rare case that shouldn't deter anyone from receiving donated organs. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called achromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all 3 cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. A teenager from Brazil recently died in one of the strangest ways you'll ever hear of. He crushed up a dead butterfly and mixed the remains with water before injecting the liquid into his leg with a syringe. After continuously vomiting and limping several days later, he was taken to the hospital where he stayed for more than a week before eventually dying from septic shock. The boy never gave a reason for injecting the insect into his bloodstream. Up until 2017, if you caught your spouse in bed with someone else in Uruguay, it was within your legal right to murder either one of them. In 1997, struggling father of 3 Billy Bob Harold Jr. became a millionaire overnight after winning the $31 million jackpot in the Texas lottery. But as friends, family, and strangers continuously pressured him to share his fortune, Harold's spending went out of control, eventually resulting in he and his wife's divorce. Just 2 years after winning the lottery, Harold ended up taking his own life just a few days after telling his friend, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." Iconic actor Jack Nicholson has faced his fair share of legal controversies over the years. In 1996, he reportedly assaulted an unnamed Hollywood socialite at a party and ruptured her breast implants. Then that same year, he allegedly promised a prostitute named Catherine Sheehan $1,000 for sex and then assaulted her when she asked for the money. Sheehan claimed that Nicholson promptly grabbed her by the hair, thumped her head on the floor, and then threw her out of his house. She received a $40,000 settlement, but later argued that this was insufficient to cover her injuries, including brain damage, which she said was actually killing her. In 1849, Henry Box Brown escaped from slavery by shipping himself in a small wooden crate from Virginia to Philadelphia. Despite the instructions on the box of "handle with care and this side up," Carriers placed the box upside down or handled it roughly several times. 350 miles and 27 brutal hours later, Brown stepped out of the box a free man and went on to become a magician. When later asked why he went to such an extreme to escape slavery, Brown was quoted saying, "If you've ever been deprived of liberty as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom." Talented artist Norman Lee worked for Marvel Comics for nearly 20 years until he suddenly disappeared in 2015. He was snorkeling in the Cayman Islands with his wife but never returned ashore, and his body was never found. In 1996, 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died as a result of his obsession to smell good. The teenager covered his entire body in cologne at least twice per day until he eventually died from a heart attack. At the time of his death, Capewell had 10 times the lethal dosage of butane in his blood after the gas built up in his body for several months. In 1974, a group of 6 men entered the hi-fi audio store in Utah and held everyone inside hostage. The hostages were then subjected to brutal torture, including being forced to drink drain cleaner, which left them with horrible burns in their throats and mouths. One of the victims had a ballpoint pen inserted into his ear that was stomped on until it punctured his eardrum and came out his throat. All 5 hostages were later shot in the head, 3 of whom died. 2 of the perpetrators were sentenced to death, while the 3 other men involved were never caught. Actor David Harbour has been very open about his dark past, particularly his struggles with mental health, alcoholism, and suicidal thoughts. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 25 after a severe manic episode, Harbour was admitted to a mental hospital when he started believing he was receiving divine messages and was possibly the Antichrist. Prior to this, he spent years battling alcohol addiction, which began in his teens and only worsened in college, leading to a life he described as lonely, directionless, and self-destructive. He is admitted to violent emotional outbursts during manic episodes, such as smashing mirrors and feeling like a danger to himself and others. At his lowest, he felt like he was slowly disappearing and contemplated taking his own life. Harbour now credits acting with saving his life since it gave him a way to channel his mental chaos into performance. Now sober and in treatment, he describes himself as someone who enjoys consciousness too much to ever return to his old ways. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage.